Balatro is very good. It's also weirdly easy to edit the game's textures and put whatever you want in there. And I am an artist. When I made this realization, I was shocked at the power I now wielded in my hands. What I had in mind, of course, was to make my own Friends of Jimbo set, with each of the face cards replaced with a particular character from my huge roster of OCs. Only one problem though. I've never seriously tried pixel art before, so I had no idea if it would work out. Only one way to find out though. At the end of this, I'll have a full roster of custom face cards, and I'll tell you how to install them into your game if you want. The first piece of the puzzle was to figure out who would go on which card. I had to include my absolute favourites, of course, but I wanted each suit to stick to characters from a certain universe, kind of like the official Friends of Jimbo cards, so certain fan favourite standalone characters didn't get a look in. In the end, I decided to make Spades a certain family of dragons, Clubs became a trio of characters from a world-building thingy, Hearts became a trio of cute bug people, and for Diamonds, I picked 3 of my Pokemon OCs. I penciled in a different one as the Jack at first, but replaced her after realising I'd picked 3 goth-ish ones. I sketched them in as I normally would, to provide reference for the actual sprites, which would be at a much tinier size. It was a bit of an exercise giving them all different poses and expressions to show off their personalities, as well as picking poses that would work for playing cards, but that was far from the main challenge of this project. With the sketches done, I started with the King of Clubs, Sammy the Zarabon, because her pose was fairly simple. And I immediately discovered the biggest struggle, simply making the characters look like themselves. The facial expressions and especially the eyes are the hardest part. It's very hard to capture little nuances in pixel, and some things just have to be left out or simplified. There's no way around it. It's also harder to capture the energy of a pose, which is something I wasn't quite satisfied with some of them. Figuring out how to connect the top and bottom halves posed challenges too, but that wasn't too difficult to learn. And yes, I know I made the king a woman, but with my roster's gender ratio, there was no way I wouldn't end up with at least some female kings and jacks. Sammy took nearly 90 minutes in total before I was satisfied. Not bad for, again, my first time, but I spent a lot of time tweaking her after I stopped recording. Something also true of the others, to varying degrees. While I was in the clubs, I went for Sammy's BFF, Fuzi the Genif. A bit of a rash move for my second sprite as it turned out, because she was one of the hardest to draw. She certainly took the absolute longest, over 2 hours. It took 45 minutes just to feel like I'd made it look like her. But even once I'd captured her Fuzi charms, I ran into a big problem. In the sketch, I hadn't decided what to do with her hands. Big mistake, because I had to figure it out now. I started with a foreshortened splayed out arm like this, but when connected to the lower half, it just looked so awkward and I couldn't get it to look right. So I completely gave up on it and pivoted to this sort of wave pose with her other hand, which worked much better. Hands in general were the other hardest thing, because duh, hands are almost always hard, but making them look convincingly like hands without having room to draw all the fingers was pretty tricky. And since I've got some runtime here, this is a good place to talk about the colours. Friends of Jimbo cards use around 6 to 12 colours in total, so I had to scrunch down the more expansive colour palettes. As it happens, I love working in limited palettes. It's always fun to try and make something work in less colours, which I suppose ties in with doing it in pixel art in the first place, making these character designs work with less detail. And the reason I mention this now is because I forgot Fuzi's gold bracelets until after I stopped recording. So when I added them afterwards, I kept the colour count in check by making her pink ear fluff colour the same as her shading colour. I decided to then just do whatever characters I felt like from this point. So here's Izzy the Nidorina. I'd hit my stride by now, so Izzy took just 60 minutes. Her design wasn't hard to translate, though I did struggle with the eyes, and decided to close her mouth because there was no way I was communicating the slightly stuck out tongue. and the Schrodinger's boob in the middle looked a bit silly. Overall, pretty smooth sailing though. In spite of the fact that I still hadn't figured out that I could turn pressure sensitivity off on the brush to make it 1,000 times easier to control. Dull. She was also one of the ones whose colours I softened and lightened to not clash with the others, especially since Balatro slightly darkens textures in-game. Next was Vertex the Porygon 2. You might think a creature made of circles and ovals would be difficult to render in squares, but she was by far the easiest out of all of these. She only took 40 minutes. Her design is very simple, you see, so there was no detail that was hard to compress, and her body shape lent itself perfectly to the playing card design. And finally turning off pressure sensitivity so I had a fixed width brush certainly didn't hurt. She turned out very cute. Next was another one I thought would be relatively easy, Harper the Androgynous Moth, who took just under an hour. Her design is fairly simple too, and it was easy to capture his laid-back but cheeky personality. This is when I started using more anti-aliasing, which is where you use an in-between colour to soften the lines. A very useful tool for pixel art because pixels are usually very binary and uncompromising, but this lets you fudge in between pixels, like if you want to slightly round off a corner or if two things are touching you can separate them so they don't blend together. You can see it the most obviously here on Harper's antennae. I decided to belatedly do a spade next, so I went with Veritian the Dragon. Finally, a king that's definitely male. I wanted to get him out of the way, but he actually wasn't as tough as I expected. I decided to tweak the pose from the sketch by giving him more of a heroic look upwards. He's very stalwart, you know. He took just under 90 minutes, and a lot of that was from trying to connect the torso together smoothly, or just figuring out his lumping great wings, which I did have to simplify in the end. It was also a pain having to make them not interfere with his whisker, but I ended up adding a drop shadow which helped with that. Side note, you may notice that I changed up the suit colours slightly. The new colours are inspired by my Sona's colour palette. Maybe the fact that the clubs are lighter and greener now will make up for me not doing high contrast versions of the cards as well. As for Veritian though, you know what? He's pretty handsome, isn't he? I was surprised by how much I liked how he turned out. Next up was Pamela, the lovable fuzzy bumblebee. She also took 60 minutes. I expected her to be easier actually, but although she has a cute and simple design, her poofy loopy Pinkie Pie hair is definitely optimised for drawing by hand and not with pixels. Her wings were a bit of a nuisance too. It was tough to make them not interfere with her silhouette while still having a pleasing shape. The face was also a bit tricky. I ended up fixing it after I stopped recording by employing the power of more anti-aliasing. Well, here's the big one. Yira, daughter of Veritian, is my #1 favourite OC, and so I take drawing her very seriously, as you'll know if you've seen that one video. It's kind of hard to capture her exact energy at the best of times, but now I had to try and do it with just tiny squares. She took a few minutes less than Fusi, but she was definitely the most grueling. The worst part was just trying to convey her demure, melancholy expression without just making her look miserable. So I tried making her smile instead, but it just wasn't working out, especially with the struggles getting her snout shape just right. And to contrast her father's sprite, I wanted to make her look slightly down, which made the snout even harder. She was the one I was least happy with. I warmed to it later, but most of the others had greatly exceeded my expectations, considering my almost total lack of experience. I suppose I have always focused on tiny details when drawing, so it's not too surprising that pixel art wouldn't be that difficult for me to adapt to, when that's exactly what you have to do in pixel art. Yira turned out alright in the end, but by that time, boy was I ready for it to be over. To treat myself after that experience, I did the other one who I knew would be easy. Alf, the praying mantis. Like Vertex, his design didn't have any excess detail which I'd have to scrunch down. He was a little harder than her though, because his body shape did not lend itself well to the playing card format, so he took 45 minutes. Plus some extra time afterwards, adding some shading because I stopped my recording too hastily. Then it was the final Pokemon, Cass, the emo goth femboy Vaporeon. And yes, you have my permission to click off the video after hearing me say those words. Jokes aside, he was another one who was harder than expected, and also took nearly 90 minutes. It was the face, man. It was so annoying to try and get the snout shape right. And I think, strictly speaking, his head did end up on the small side, but it did suddenly come together when I started adding colour and, what else? Anti-aliasing. Also the arm. I added to the sketches pose by having him raise his hand, and I really like how that hand turned out actually. I was really proud of that. When I was testing seeing him in my game, I couldn't get over how cool he looked. I rounded out his outfit with this checkerboard pattern to represent fishnets, of course. I'll see myself out. The last two characters needed some updates to their designs, since I hadn't drawn them in a long time. Especially the case for Sandria, Mother of Yera. At this point I threw out the sketch I'd done already, and laid out my vision for her updated design with a pose that was more uniquely her, though I could not decide what to do with the hand. The spriting process was yet again just under 90 minutes, and yet again the challenge came mostly in figuring out the blasted face. The snout shape was a struggle, the playful smile was a struggle, her head was too big, and this hand didn't work out either, so I ended up pivoting to a blowing kiss type of pose. But eventually, my life was once again saved by anti-aliasing, and I was surprisingly pleased by her final result too, go figure. There's an argument to be made that she looks too similar to Yera at a glance, but, well, some family resemblance is of course inevitable. And once I'd played with them both for a bit and got used to it, telling the difference at a glance became second nature. And last, but not least, was Morshar, who is the same species as Fuzi. The changes I had in mind for his design were smaller, so after bashing out a quick headshot to visualize them I could still go ahead using the original sketch. And guess what? He took almost 90 minutes. And yes, this is a male. The femininity is pretty typical of his species, though he might be cuter than the average. The only real bugbear I had with this one was, again, the snout shape. I had to somewhat compromise in the end with this flat line at the bottom. The main reason he took relatively long is just because he has so much stuff going on. And I was concerned that he'd look a bit too busy with his giant wings and giant ponytail, but I don't think it ended up being an issue. If you look closely, you'll see he's the only one I used some dithering on, which I think blended pretty seamlessly. And there they all are. Let me tell you, seeing my characters in my game was just so special. In between drawing each one, I'd export the file and put it in the game and boot it up and play a few rounds just to see how they looked and if they needed any fixes. It was always a joyous moment when I drew them to hand for the first time. And now I get to play with them forever. Okay, I promised I would teach you how to install them yourself, so here's the rundown. You've got two options, the manual way, which is what I used, and the full-on mod way. Here's how you do it manually. Follow the link to my DeviantArt in the description and download the 1x size deck texture if you play with pixel smoothing disabled, or the 2x size if you play with it enabled. Make sure it's called 8bitdeck.png once it's saved. Download 7-zip. It's a free program that lets you unzip archive files. Go to your Steam library and find Balatro's local files. Right-click the Balatro exe, then go to 7-zip, open archive. Navigate to the 1x or 2x size textures folder depending on which image you downloaded. Just drag the new texture in, and Bob's your uncle. You can easily do this yourself to make your own mod. Just drag the original texture out to extract it, edit the image however you please, and just drag it back in when you're done, and congratulations, you're now a game modder. Now here's how you do it the full-on mod way. First you need to install the Balatro mod framework, comprised of Steam modded and Lovely. Following their download instructions, Then download the Greenlands deck mod link in the description and drag its folder into your mods folder. Much more convenient in the long run, but the coding required to make it is too complicated for me personally. Whoa, okay, stop the presses. I actually have learned how to make these deck skins myself now, because of a very helpful tutorial made by Cecebasti, who was the guy kind enough to make the deck skin for my cards. You can find a link to his video in the description too. In fact, I'm now offering custom playing cards on commission. And if you order a King Queen Jack set or a full suit, I'll throw in a deck skin mod for free so you can play with them if you want. Sorry to throw in an ad at the end of this art video, but I've had enough interest that I thought I'd mention it if people were curious about having their own made. In any case, it's easy enough to try making your own, so if 60 bones sounds too steep, go for it. I'd be glad to answer your questions. And if it hadn't been so easy to just drag and drop the image into the game, if you hadn't been allowed to just split the game open and replace all the assets with no fuss, there's probably no way I would have tried this. And I'm glad I did. It was a fun project. And even if pixel art came surprisingly naturally to me, it was still a learning experience. Of course, now that I was done with this, the obvious next step was to make custom jokers as well. Now, you might be able to figure out the obvious problem with that idea, that there are only 12 face cards, but 150 jokers! I would have to be insane to take on a project like that. So naturally, a few months later, I took the plunge and started work on a far, far greater endeavour than the one I just did. If you like the video, then like the video, and if you want to see the probably very long custom jokers video, then subscribe to catch that if I ever finish it. And which of my cards is your favourite? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and good night everybody.